Hey guys, welcome back. Today's video is a continuation of the last one. In the last one, I showed you guys how I created this piece in Blender, but today's video, I will be talking about how I went about post-processing this piece and how I got from this to this. This is a very simple scene, so there wasn't many things that I did to achieve this. So I think it will just be a short video breaking down what the steps I took in order to get this. First of all, what I rendered out from Blender is the main render layer and also the mist pass. If you don't know how to render out mist pass, if you just go into Blender, go into the properties tab, go into the view layer properties, and if you check mist, you will render out the mist pass. And if you go into compositing, you can just plug this in to here, and then you can just save whatever you get from the render result. So what is a mist pass? A mist pass basically tells you what is closer to the camera and what is further from the camera. The further it is, the whiter it gets, and the closer it is, the darker it gets. So as you can see, the tree over here is darker than this area in the back because it's closer to the camera. So by using this as a mask, you can control where the stuff are gonna be. For instance, if you want fog behind this building, you can just use this as a mask and adjust the levels, increase the contrast a little bit, just like using color ramp in Blender. You can use here, you can use this levels and control where your stuff in Photoshop would locate, so like that. But anyway, let's actually get started. So first of all, I brought in the raw render into Photoshop, and I added a background to close off all these stuff. As you can see, without this background, there's nothing in the back, but I wasn't really bothered by it because I know I was gonna add fog to cover all the sharp edges anyway. So I added the background layer, and then I also painted some parts over here a little bit lighter black, because without this, it was really dark there. So I painted some of the gray parts again. And after that, I added glow to the light bulbs over here. Just a soft brush using this color with low opacity. Just paint them in like that. But that's what I did. Then I painted in some fur for the cat over here. You can see I added a little bit of texture in the cat because by then I wasn't using any fur in Blender, so I had to paint back all the textures in Photoshop. So that's what I did here. It gave a little bit of that furry look in here for the cat, but it's way better to do it in 3D because that way you have more control with and it reacts to light even better. After that, I added some smokes for this air conditioner unit and the chimney above. Very subtle smokes over there. I also added more smokes to the bright areas. That gives a little bit of that atmosphere look to it. Then I added a faint fog. This is a fog. Let's disable this layer first. Change to 100%. This is a fog image that I downloaded online. You can just search on Google or whatever platform you're using. Just search up fog and you can grab that into here. And then I use the mist pass to control where it is being placed. This is way too much, so I tone it down to about 12%, and that gives that foggy look. So without it and with it makes a huge difference in the overall atmosphere. Then I added another fog layer. This time this is how it looks with 100% opacity. That's how it looks. Just dim it down, but instead of using a mist pass this time, I painted in manually for these parts over here, and that kind of looks like a very low-lying fog or dust flying off around here. And after that, I added another fog layer. So let's disable this layer mask and turn it up. This is another fog smokes that I downloaded online. Just place it in here. I don't know why I grouped this, but anyway, and I use a mask to control where it's gonna be at. But this mask, I changed the levels of the mask. So instead of having a faint, a gradual gradient from black to white, I made it very, I made it to have a lot more contrast. So the black parts are the house is in the black part, so the fog is not covering the house. And then I decreased the opacity to about 6%. Enable the mask again, and that adds a bit too. So let's see. Without these fogs, it didn't look that atmospheric. After adding these fog layers in, it adds a bit more atmosphere to the whole scene. And after that, I add some dust particles that I found online. Just place it in and change this to screen blending mode, because normally it would just be black and white. So if you use screen, the black parts are going to be transparent and the white parts will stay. And I used a mask. I just painted in manually where I think dust might be covering the lens. So around here. Usually you don't want to paint those in at the very dark spots like this, because there's no light that's gonna hit the camera, hit the dust particles around that area. So you want to focus more on the brighter parts of the scene. And after that, I added some more small little particle effects for the glowing parts. For instance, right here and right there and right around here. As you can see, without this and with this, I just added very subtle particle elements in. And then after that, I added a hue saturation for the last one, which is this one, to change it to yellow color. Then I added more overall smokes. These are just painted in with smoke brushes that I have here. So if I can show you, do have a lot of brushes that I purchased off of ArtStation and stuff. So this is one of the smoke brushes that I use. That's basically what I use for this overall smoke. I make it very, very subtle, used a very low opacity brush and paint in where I think there might be smoke around. And then after that, what I did was I merged all the layers that I have here by holding Ctrl-Alt-Shift and clicking E. It merged everything together but on a separate layer. And I go into Filter, Other, and High Pass. I changed this radius a little bit to see the outlines of the buildings and all of the things that I want. This is going to be controlling the sharpness of the whole image. Then once it's done, I change the blending mode to any of these three: the soft light, the hard light, or the vivid light. Accordingly, some of the renders that I may do, I might just use a soft light, or sometimes I might use hard or vivid light. So I think in here I used a hard light, and then I decrease the opacity a little bit. It kind of increases the sharpness of everything in here. So without this layer, it's a bit soft, and with this layer it's a bit sharper. I kind of like to do that in most of my projects. It kind of gives that different vibe to it. I don't know why, but I really like how it looks after adding that. So after that, I just grouped everything together, and then I merged them all together in a new layer again, converted that into Smart Object. Instead of showing you what I do, instead of breaking down what I did, I will show you how I would go about color grading them. So let's merge everything together, convert to Smart Object, and to go into Camera Raw Filter, all you need to do is hold Control Shift and press A. That will load, and you'll get into this Camera Raw Filter. Now, I don't know if you have used this before, but this is all based on personal preferences. You can definitely change up the colors and the vibe of the entire piece by just by depending on your eyes and your preferences. But for this project, I added a little bit of purple tint into it. So this is the basic white balance controls. You can control if your image is going to be warm looking or cool looking. Just don't go overboard with it, because it will just turn into blue. Just change it up a little bit like this. I usually like to go for the cool tone temperature for night scenes, because that's fits more, and add a little bit of purple tint into it. And I might increase the exposure a little bit, because I usually render things out darker than I would normally have my final renders to be at, because I like to increase the exposure a lot more and add in contrast, because if it's dark and add contrast, it's just going to be darker. So I brighten up the image overall and brought up the contrast as well, and maybe I might play with the highlights. So for the highlights, it usually is for the brighter parts of this. See over here, in whatever cases you want to see how it looked before, you can just tap the backward slash once, and you will see whatever you've done, whatever you had before the Camera Raw filter, and if you tap it back again, you can see the final after the color grading. But you can also click this little button over here that will show before and after, and you can also click these to see the comparison before and after this. But yeah, I tend to just use this and just tap to see before and after. I usually like to decrease the blacks a little bit to make them darker, and also increase the texture, the clarity a little bit to improve the overall clarity of the image. Makes it a little bit sharper, and maybe play with the haze a little. Sometimes you can get great looks. Even now, this looks insane. But you can also make it really hazy by bringing down the dehaze. And I usually like to boost up my vibrance and saturation as well. And in curves, what I usually like to do is bring up the blacks level, this, so it fades out the blacks, and basically that's it. Others are just tweaking sliders and stuff. You just go for whatever might look the best. Color mixer is very important. You can control what color, you can control how the color looks. So for instance, the oranges, you can make it either red or yellow, and you can control individual hues of the whole image. You can also boost up the saturation of individual colors too. Usually I like to boost up the saturation of the greens, usually in dark pieces, because they look very dull right now. But yeah, maybe brighten up some parts too. So you have this luminance tab that controls individual hues and brighten them individually. Like for instance, if you check the red I don't know, mailbox over here, if I brighten this up, you can see how bright it got. I also like to add color grading. Maybe for shadows I might use a orange hue and add in a little bit of that orange look in those shadow areas. So without this and with this, gives a little bit of that faded hue tint. And I just go okay. And another thing I like to add is a magic bullet looks. In here, what I usually like to do is that I would turn these off. I would like to add some exposure in here, make it a little brighter. I will add some diffusion for the glowing parts over here. You can see it adds a little bit of that subtle glow. I didn't go too much overboard with it, and I also added chromatic aberration for some of the parts over here. It's just very subtle chromatic aberration. Added some haze and flare, added some lens distortion, and finally added some film grain. Film grain is really important because that adds a lot to an image to form a texture throughout. I don't know how to explain it, but film grain is very important, but just make sure you don't go overboard with it, because look at this, how noisy it would get. Kind of looks cool though, but I don't really like it. So around 5% kind of looks good. You can also add film grain just within Photoshop camera raw filter itself, but I like to use magic bullet looks for this. I've started using the analog FX lately, and it's a much better plugin for Photoshop. So kind of recommend you to check it out, but for this one I used magic bullet looks. I don't think it's that different. The original one had a lot more orange hues in the shadow areas, maybe a little brighter, but I got pretty close trying to recreate this whole thing with the camera raw filter and magic bullet looks. But yeah, I hope you guys learn a thing or two from this. I didn't do much complicated stuff in here because I didn't really need to. So make sure you don't go overboard with any of the settings here, or it might come out looking really weird. I'm gonna stop here. There's nothing more to show you guys for this project. Maybe I'll do a more complicated breakdown for post-processing, like my recent works where I had to do a lot of post work to make them look a lot better. So yeah, so stay tuned for those, and stay tuned for my Patreon as well. It's gonna come out pretty soon, I believe. I'm still working on some of the stuff to be there on Patreon. I don't want to leave you guys hanging in the beginning. So I'm really looking forward to launch that. But anyway, if you haven't checked out the first video, you should definitely do it, because that included most of the stuff that I do in Blender. But anyway, thank you very much again for watching. I'll make sure to upload again sometime in the next week, or maybe next 2 weeks if I'm available. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time.